I am a huge proponent of introducing your young children to a second language. Now, what resources can you use to do that, other than the typical answer of books and songs and incorporating that language into your daily routines? Those are all incredibly important and great things to do, but sometimes you can find a curriculum a very helpful tool. I frequently get asked about Spanish curriculums that are appropriate for early learners. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 different Spanish curriculums that are designed for the homeschool setting and for early learners to help you as an additional tool on your journey to teaching Spanish to your kids. So I'm going to show you 3 different options and talk about the differences between these options. One of these options I do see as probably the best option if you have zero background in Spanish yourself, and I'll talk about that. But I hope you enjoy this video. If you like this kind of content, please give me a thumbs up. That helps me a lot. All right, let's get started. All right, now I'm going to give you a look inside the Spanish curriculum from Homeschool Languages. Of the 3 Spanish curriculums I'm going to show you today, this is probably the one that I would most recommend for if you as a parent and if your children are wanting to start learning Spanish from a background of nothing. This to me is the most friendly for total beginners, and I hope that you'll see why as we go through it. I'm going to be walking you through the very first lesson in the curriculum. Since this is for total beginners, I wanted to start with the first one, but do know that there are a few other elements involved in this curriculum. There are printables, which include like flashcards for playing games and some other types of printable games. There are booklets that are in a typical first reader type style with like one line of text, very simple text and images. They recommend that you use a puppet and a globe in many of your lessons. And in addition to their introduction to the language main curriculum, they also have themed units that come out each month. And those have different themes like at home or at the playground, different types of themes that are still practical. So with each unit, and a unit lasts for several lessons, but with each unit of the curriculum, they're going to tell you what are the learning objectives. These are the I cans. I can use different greetings at different times of the day. That's going to be your buenas noches, buenos tardes, all of those type of greetings. You're going to have yes and no, sí and no. You're going to say hola and adios. So you're going to learn these very, very basic elements of speaking Spanish. They also have a cultural exposure element in their programs as well, and there will be different cultural exposures for each unit. Okay, so let's get started looking at the lesson. We have a very pretty design here. There are QR codes for songs that you need to listen to, but this is your initial introduction, and you're using your puppet in the initial introduction. When you read the curriculum, they will have an explanation of why they incorporate a puppet, but it is a very clever idea that can add fun and kind of take pressure off of language learning, but you're learning the word hola to begin. Here's some notes for the teacher on some compliments that you can be giving in Spanish. So we're learning this Buenos Dias song, and we have actions to go along with it. Then, so you have a completely scripted lesson here. This is why I say this is very good for if you as a parent have zero background in speaking Spanish. And you'll see as you go through the lesson that they have a lot of support for those who do not speak Spanish. Here we talk about greetings. We use these greetings at different times of day. Then we're being introduced to a color. And along with the introduction to the color, you're being directed to take out the food cards, which are included in the printables file or in the printed out set if you buy the physical set. And you're playing a game of looking for rojo on each food card. You're looking for that color. Then you have a saying goodbye and walking around your house saying goodbye, and you can have a cool down of the lesson where you're reading booklet number 1. That is one of those early reader type booklets where the child is not necessarily expected to be reading it, because this can be used with children who have not been introduced to Spanish phonics, obviously. But you can read the booklet to your student and have them repeat each line so that they can grow familiar with it. They give you teacher homework, which can helps you to be reviewing what has been taught or helps you to prepare for the next lesson. Here you're writing down the new vocabulary that you have been introduced to in this lesson, which you find right here. New vocabulary, very simple vocabulary. Write those down on a chart and make sure you're reviewing it before the next lesson. They also give you, and I really like this part, creative ideas for extra practice. So you could do this at the time of the lesson, or you could do this in between lessons. And I believe this is roughly intended to be done about 2 lessons a week. But of course, if you are using it, practicing it in between lessons, it's going to be more effective. Then at the end of the lesson, and this is why I say you have a lot of support here if you are new to speaking Spanish, you have a recording of the words used in this lesson. So if you really don't know these words at all, you can find them recorded. And there's also a pronunciation guide, which you can see here. Sometimes they use English letters, or sometimes they use just kind of a intuitive pronunciation. So if you're familiar with English, hopefully you can figure out that, right? Buen trabajo, which to me, it's kind of harder to read these things versus to read this, but that's because I do have the background in being able to read Spanish. So if you read Spanish, probably just focus on the Spanish. But that is one lesson in Homeschool Languages. Now remember, check out their website so that you can see their themed units, so that you can see what all they have to offer. They also offer other languages, so that's something to note about them. But this is a good option for introducing children, even from a young pre-reader level, to the Spanish language. Now here is a look inside Beautiful Mundo. Beautiful Mundo also has multiple elements to its curriculum. It has the teacher's guide, which there is a lot here in the teacher's guide. It is not an open and go scripted teacher's guide, hopefully, as you can tell. You have a kind of a week at a glance with different elements that you can do. You are reading a picture book. You are reading poetry from the poetry book. You have a song to learn. You might have more than one song to sing and to learn. There might be a craft activity. There's maybe just some general notes on languages, games, ideas, more notes on the language, as well as a vocabulary list. So it's not open and go. It's not do this on this day. Here's the script for teaching this. It's a little bit more fluid in exposing your children to literature, exposing them to songs and to poems, playing with them in Spanish, using this language throughout your life. Or you can, if you want, if your goal is to really learn these words, you could make up kind of your own vocabulary games or quizzes almost with them, or just oral quizzes of how do you say nice to meet you and things like that. So this is where you start. You are reading a book in Spanish on week 1, day 1. So I have really enjoyed this program. We have used it. We've used about 20 weeks of it so far at the time that I'm filming this video. So I have used it for a significant part of the program. I think that this program is flexible. It can be used if you're focusing mostly on this vocabulary and inventing your own activities to practice that. You can be using it if you or your kids are new to Spanish, but I do think that this is a program that's a little bit more inviting if you or your kids have at least some background in Spanish and are wanting to level up and are wanting to dive into Spanish songs and poetry and books. That's more how we have used it, and I feel it works very well for that. But I think it could be pretty overwhelming if you were starting from ground zero. So that's something I do think you should be aware of. And it's great to have curriculums that are designed for those of us who do have a background in Spanish, but maybe are not strong enough or just don't really know where to go to how to level up and how to keep improving and diving into Spanish books and poems. So I'm going to give you a look at a lesson further in to also give you an example of the complexity of language and the beauty of language that can be included. In this week, which is week 24, we had, hopefully you can see the vocabulary here, which is a nature-themed vocabulary. So the vocabulary words are fairly basic. for week 24 into the program, but the content that you'll be reading is not necessarily the most basic. For this week, it is the book El Violín de Hada, and this is a cool book. Many of their books they really focus on authentic literature from South American, from Latin American countries. But notice this, you are having, this much text to read in Spanish. Now, if you're doing this with very young kids or with kids who don't have some sort of background in Spanish, or if you yourself don't have a background in Spanish, you might find this a little bit overwhelming to be reading a long, fairly complex story in Spanish. It is a picture book. The pictures help a lot with comprehension, but there's a fair amount of content here, and it's not on the most basic short sentences, basic vocabulary. You are being exposed to very rich vocabulary here. In addition to this, you are also reading a few poems from Todo es Canción, which these are mostly educational themed poems from different areas of education, simple and fairly straightforward because they're focused on early childhood themes. We have alphabet-related themes, friendship, numbers, so we have all these little number rhymes. I really like this book of poems, but again, you're diving right into reading Spanish poetry. This book is bilingual, and several of the picture books are bilingual, especially at the beginning. So that can be helpful when you're just getting started. I will give you an example. Here's an easier book from an earlier week in the program where you have Quimito, and then here you have the English, and here you have the Spanish. So having the English there can definitely help you. And some of the books are bilingual, quite a few are, but there are also a good handful that are not. So I just do think you should be aware of that if you're considering this. One thing that makes Beautiful Mundo easy to adapt for multiple different ages is that they have multiple types of activity books to go alongside that are available at different levels. They have a coloring book type of activity where all it really is just this drawing of an animal and the name of an animal. So that's a coloring book. That's something that I could use with my youngest son, my 3-year-old. With my older son, who is able to write letters and who's able to begin working on reading and understanding syllables, he's able to do this level of the workbook, where you are writing letters, where you're writing out syllables, where you're counting how many syllables are in a word. And we really liked these activities where they have palabras that have a certain letter in them or that begin with a certain letter, because I use these as little quizzes. And a lot of times I will read him the word, como montaña, and then he just acts like whatever that is, which I always find very funny, his way of acting out words that you might not usually think of as being acted out. But that's one way that we have used this little quiz at his level. They also have a higher level workbook that I have not used because I don't have any children that are writing at that level, but they have a copy workbook where they have quotes from your storybook of the week at the top of the page, and then lines beneath the quote for your child to copy that quote out on. That's a great way to up the challenge for this level. So that's maybe if you have a 7-year-old or someone who's able to really write. Another element of the program, and I didn't print out their version because I just already had a little journal like this, but basically they have a printable version of a blank journal, and that's supposed to be your book of stories. So after every week, you draw a picture from your story and you write a little summary, or you write something that you remember from the story you read this week, and you ideally should be writing that in Spanish. So because my son is not really writing yet, we talk about it together and come up with what he wants to say to remember this story, and I will write the words down for him. So that's Beautiful Mundo. All right, the next Spanish curriculum option I want to show you today is Llamitas. Llamitas Spanish by Mama Llama Linguist is what her Instagram account is, but they also offer other levels. They just released a pre-K morning binder, which looks awesome and is something I'm going to be using with my 3-year-old. So if you're looking for something for a younger child, you might want to look at this. This level I say is most ideal at really that pre-K to kindergarten level from my own experience of using it. I started it when my son was 4 and now he's 5 and still continuing the program. He was about 4.5 when we started. For us, that was a very good level. And I do talk more about age with this one because I feel like this one is a little bit more age specific because it has a more academic focus than purely just a language learning focus. And I hope you'll see that as we come through. So right here you can see lesson 1. I'm trying to show you lesson 1 so you can see the starting point. And you can see kind of the differences that each program takes. So again, we are starting with Buenos Dias. This is a very popular beginning first song to learn in Spanish. But this is a themed unit. So every unit of 12 lessons, or no, every unit of 6 lessons has a theme. This is El Océano. So we're learning themed vocabulary. So your vocabulary for this unit isn't the typical hola, adios, all of those things. Your core vocabulary for this unit is going to be ocean-related words, and your little readers that you're reading will be ocean-themed, and many of your activities will be as well. You're also doing a lot of work with letters and syllables from the very beginning. So we're tracing letters, but we're also learning to sound out. So, ma. We're learning these basic syllables in Spanish. Learning letters. We are diving into songs related to our ocean theme. And one thing I do want to mention is whether you get this printed book or whether you get the printable curriculum, very much be aware that there's a lot of resources on the online course portal that Llamitas has. They have audios for you to listen to, and you will need some of those audios for your lessons. So for example, they have audios for all of these words, which is helpful if you are doing this and you don't have a background of speaking Spanish. But I don't need audios for these very simple one-word things. However, they do have activities where you specifically have to listen to the audio and complete an activity based on your comprehension. So I do want to point out that they have audios, but they also have extra printable activities that are not in this book. They have extra flashcards, they have book recommendations, sometimes video recommendations for the songs that you're doing. So there's a lot in the course portal. Don't forget about the course portal and the audio for sure. I want to scooch forward a little bit toward more like the second half so you can see how you are advancing. And this is where you can really see that there are very academic elements being involved throughout the whole unit. You are learning to count. So you're learning to count these, you practice counting. Now you're going to practice saying them and tracing them. This is why I say this one I feel like is a little bit more age-based. Of course, if you had an older child, they would still need to learn how to count in Spanish, even if they already know how to count in English. But it's also age-based in the sense that, a 3-year-old might not be ready to count from 60 to 70 and these larger numbers. They may have made that connection. Some 3-year-olds do, but not all 3-year-olds will be ready. You're also starting to see, okay, some of these words have the double R, some have one R. Let's read the words. So depending on how proficient your child is, they could be reading this word and matching it, or you could be helping them read it, or you could read it to them. So that's kind of how you can adapt it a little bit. It is adaptable, but I do feel like this one maybe has a tighter age range than some of the others that I showed you. But Llamitas has already created an earlier level, and they are going to be releasing a first grade and above level soon. So that's a good thing to know if you're interested in a different level. They have a lot of work with syllables. So this is why I say this is more academic. In other just learning Spanish as a foreign language programs, you're not going to see a lot of syllable work. But syllable work is a big part of typical learning to read programs in Spanish. So we're doing syllables. This is conejo. So which one do we have? We have co in it. We also have art elements, artist studies, conversations, and these have been come to be one of my favorite exercises, which these are for the more advanced speaker. This is not if you're using this and just beginning to learn Spanish, but for a child with a background in Spanish, you're reading a couple of paragraphs and you're having discussion questions, comprehension questions based on those. You also have early readers that you are scheduled. So these are scheduled for you right in the lessons, and they have 2 for each unit. So here's our pet one, because we're in this pet unit. And you can see that they do have the English on them. So there is a lot of support if you are not a native Spanish speaker. You can see that in the scripts right here. They have bilingual scripts, so you can read it straight in Spanish or you can read it in English, depending on your goals and you and your child's level at this point. So they do definitely offer a lot of scaffolding for English speakers who are learning Spanish, but they also offer the opportunity to really go deeper and just do academics in Spanish for those kids with a background in Spanish. I hope that you find this helpful for getting a glimpse at these different Spanish language options. I do have a discount code, which I will be leaving down in the description below.